I know we have several other people that we're waiting on, but I'm going to go ahead and get started on some of the logistics of today's lab because we do have quite a bit to cover today. We're at the halfway point, which is really exciting. So we've done 3 labs so far, and we're on our 4th now. And then we have the quiz coming up next week. So I wanted to structure today's lab in a format that maybe helped you understand maybe how to study for the lab, and kind of get you going on some study methods that would be helpful for the future labs to come for muscles, since those they kind of fall in a down period of the semester, right, that 3rd quarter, and they can be a little tough. So I just want to make sure that we're really developing some good study habits for success in anatomy lab. Along with that, I want to quickly mention about office hours. Those are open for absolutely any question that you have. If you want to know about how to study for this class, if you have questions about a GRQ or your quiz or literally anything that you want to go over, you're confused about a concept, please do stop by. I'm there two hours a week, and those hours are not set in stone. So if there's a better hour that would work for you and you have class during both of the office hours that I have, then just shoot me an email and we can schedule something to meet. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty, can everyone see the screen? Someone give me a thumbs up. Yep, thank you, Gretchen. Alrighty, so we're doing the appendicular skeleton today, and we just completed the axial skeleton last week. My dentist calling me. So we just finished the appendicular skeleton last week, or the axial skeleton last week, and so now we're going to go into the appendicular skeleton. And I think I briefly mentioned a little foreshadowing onto the appendicular skeleton, how it is about our upper and our lower limbs. So this is just a cute little picture that Dr. Johnson made to kind of show you overall what those structures are going to be. So some important notes for this lab. It's going to be a little bit different, I think, from the other labs that we're used to doing. I'm hoping for this one to be really, really interactive. I have lots of questions built into my outline that I've made that I'm really hoping that you all can interact with me and answer questions. None of these questions are graded. None of them are, am I expecting you to know completely 100% off of one glance of the lab text? So if you can, please do participate while I ask questions. So that's going to be really important for today's lab. And I encourage you to use your lab text. So follow along with me as we're going. If you can pull up the Zoom meeting and the lab text on 2 different slides, if you have 2 different monitors, that works as well. And that way you can actually follow along and actually go hunting for some of these questions I'm going to be asking. And the reason that I'm going to be doing it in this format is because the lab text is actually quite dense. And I think that sometimes when we're reading through it the first time, we might kind of, ourselves try to sum up what we're seeing, find the big keywords, and that's great. That's really encouraged for you to find those keywords and really focus on what the objectives are for the lab. But there are really important details in the lab text that might show up on quizzes, right? So that's why it would be really important to make sure you're paying attention to those details. And today's lab in particular is going to really build for the next 2 labs that we're going to be talking about. So I really want you to be focusing on these details. As you were reading, you probably came across a lot of attachments for muscles, and you're like, wait a minute, we're not doing muscles yet, right? But we're trying to build you a foundation of understanding. So when you get to muscles, it's not just memorization, but you're really trying to understand how these muscles work, where they're attached, and when we start those, it won't be the first time you've seen it because you already have some of these terminologies in your head. Okay, so first thing is anatomical position. This is going to be very important for this lab and for labs 5 and 6, like I mentioned. So I just want to quickly mention this. I don't know if the lab text mentioned it, but anatomical position is exactly how this model is depicted. So your hands are going to be palms forward, arms and legs are completely extended and pointing straight forward. So just always refer to anatomical position and keep that in the back of your mind when we're talking about how are these movements affecting the bones or the muscles that are contributing to these movements, right? So really think about anatomical position every time you're understanding and trying to visualize what is happening on the body. Start in anatomical position. So that's one thing. So in addition to anatomical position, since we haven't started muscles yet, but I think muscles do really play an important role into the appendicular skeleton lab, I want to mention quickly that muscles are going to be the connections between the shortest paths into bone parts, right? And this is a generalization, I know, but in general, you can follow the ideology that if I give you an attachment for a muscle, two attachments, two places where it will be attached between this muscle, then the muscle is going to connect between the shortest path. It's not going to take the longest path. And the reason that's important is because it'll help you understand what happens if that muscle contracts, right? And we know if muscles contract, they're going to shorten that space even further. So to recap, muscles will attach between the shortest path between two bone parts, and then as they contract, they're going to shorten that distance. So with that in your mind and nothing else about muscles for this lab, hopefully that will get you started on understanding, well, if I know that a muscle attaches between this part of a bone and this part of a bone, and I draw that line between, in my head, I draw that line and then I shorten that distance, what is the motion that's happening? Are we understanding why this logic would be important? Yes. Any questions on what I'm saying, or does it make sense? How muscles are important to bones? Hopefully that just makes common sense. Okay. And another thing is that for this lab and for the labs to come, I really, really encourage you to start using yourself as a study tool. And I've mentioned this before, right? That, you know, anatomy lab is kind of cool because the study guide or the cheat sheet is on your body, right? You just have to study it beforehand. So while we're looking at these different terminologies, if I'm saying flexing the forearm, then actually flex the forearm. When I'm saying extending, extend it. Doing the actions will help you develop another way to study and recall this information. So I really, really encourage you to do that. That's also going to be really helpful if you're reading a case study and you're trying to understand, what is this case study explaining to me? What is happening to this patient or this person? What is the position of their body? Well, go ahead and act it out, and that'll help you understand what's actually happening. Okay. So another thing that we're going to be doing for this lab, this Google document right here, if Annie is in the chat, if you can just send that in the chat to everyone. Sorry, if Annie is in the Zoom, can you send that to the chat so that everyone has access to this Google document? And I would like everyone to go ahead and make a copy of this however you want, but this is a worksheet that I created for you all over this weekend, and I hope it'll be helpful for you to kind of consolidate all of the joints. So there's going to be a lot of joints, right? And we mentioned joints last week in lab 3, and we had 2 joints that we talked about in particular with the atlanto-occipital and the atlanto-axial. And we also talked about some joints, the intercostal joints between vertebrae. So this week we're going to be adding a lot more joints to that list of joints that we know. So I want you to kind of keep track of those joints as we go. So what I would recommend, and again, this is up to you. I'm not going to be able to force you to do any of this that I'm asking you to do for today's lab, but I really do think it will help us if we're studying and preparing for the quiz that's coming up. But what I would recommend is that you make a copy, and as we go through today's class, write down the joints that you see as I'm talking about them, or as we have poll everywhere questions about them, case studies, whatever. Kind of keep that running list of these joints, fill out the information, and then you'll have your own little template of the joints. And then what I'd recommend you do is use a completely blank document of the joint template and try to put in all the joints by yourself without looking at it, and see if you can see how many you can get and see how many you can get accurately. And then the ones that you missed, now you know those are the ones that I have to kind of be more particular about and figure out some way to remember.
Zara, I only have the answer key version.
Also, one last thing to add to your computer. I know there's probably a ton of screens open right now for you all, but if you can get Complete Anatomy up and running, we're going to have a individual activity coming up soon. So you can go ahead and start getting that loaded, since I know it takes a little bit of time. Alrighty, are there any questions about the logistics of today's lab? I know that was a little bit.
Zara, can you hear me?
Questions? Was everyone able to get the joint document?
No.
Yeah. Annie? You're muted. You texting me? Okay. Okay, I think what Annie's trying to say is it's not working. Is that possibly right? I don't have the blank version. Okay, yeah. So let me just send the blank version. Thanks, Annie. Share. And like I said, try not to Please don't edit this document. Make a copy so that everyone can do it on their own. Okay. Alrighty. Does everyone have the document now? Go ahead and see if you can open that and tell me if it works. I know sometimes they're sharing access. Okay, I see everyone popping up, so that's great. And just as a walkthrough, there's the type of joint. So I think we talked about 5. You might find a few more, but from what I read from the document, there should be about 5 types of joints that you'll see. And then these are the different joints that you'll be filling out. The name, the classification, and the movements that it allows for. And then also here's just a little activity for you to do after class, and it's just listing the similarities and differences between the upper limbs and the lower limbs. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started if no one else has any questions right now. All good? How's everyone doing? Are we feeling pumped to learn about the appendicular skeleton on Monday at 5 o'clock? Probably not, no. But that's okay, we're gonna get through it, it's gonna be fun. Okay, so did that. Let's see what you remember from your reading. So if you can pull up Poll Everywhere, here's the URL, and you can also text. This should just be a quick basic recall. Oh, did it lock it? Okay, I'm gonna open it back up because I know we have a lot of people who didn't get a chance to answer, and I think it's because it's the first Poll Everywhere. So go ahead and put your answers in. I have 24, so I'm waiting on 3 more people. As always, this is not for credit accuracy, sorry, this is just for participation. Okay. So let's see. So where does the axial skeleton meet the upper limb skeleton? So most of us said the sternoclavicular joint, and that is exactly correct. So you'll probably see the acromioclavicular joint very soon. Sternocostal joints, does everyone know what the sternocostal joints are? Maybe if you don't remember it exactly, can anyone break it down and kind of decipher what might the sternocostal joint be?
Is it where the ribs meet?
Oh, Caitlin. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Go ahead.
Is it where the ribs meet the sternum?
It is where the ribs meet the sternum. And is that a bone touching bone?
No.
Why no? No is correct, but what's connecting it?
Isn't there some kind of cartilage in it?
There's cartilage. Yep, exactly. So if you remember from the axial skeleton and those images of the ribs wrap around, but they don't exactly touch. The bones don't touch the sternum. We have that little portion of the cartilage that will attach to the sternum. Great. And then the glenohumeral joint we will also talk about. Alrighty. And here's one more question. Again, a basic recall, trying to get you thinking about how the axial skeleton will connect to the appendicular skeleton. So what do we think about this? All right, that's 27. Okay, so I just thought of something while you all were putting your answers in. I'm gonna challenge you all that everyone responds to one question I ask today in the main group, okay? So if you haven't responded to something at some point and you're like, you know what, I think I got this question, go ahead and volunteer. If you answer usually a lot, maybe step back a little bit today and give other people some space to voice their thoughts and opinions, and we're gonna see if we can get everyone to talk at least once today, okay? Does that sound okay? And if you're like, I don't want to talk, you can go ahead and write in the chat. Alrighty, so where does the axial skeleton meet the lower limb skeleton? Let's see what we thought. So we have kind of a division right here between the lumbosacral joint and the sacroiliac joint. So can someone who wrote lumbosacral joint, can you explain what you might think, why you justified that answer?
My thinking was I couldn't remember the actual one. I think it's the sacroiliac or whatever it is. I think
Sacroiliac? Yep.
now, but my thinking was I knew since we did the axial skeleton last time that was like the spinal cord and the skull. So I knew it couldn't really be like the hips or pelvis area, so it was going to be somewhere above that. And I was thinking of the lumbar vertebrae and where that might connect. So that was my thinking.
Yeah. Okay. That was a pretty good logic that you were using to think through that. And you were almost correct, except last week, if you recall, we talked about 4 different types of vertebrae. So we talked about the cervical, the thoracic, the lumbo, and the sacral vertebrae, right? So the sacral vertebrae will join and form what we see as that like triangle shape at the end of our, like where our tailbone forms, right? And all of our vertebrae, they are fused. So the lumbosacral joint is not actually going to be a joint that we talk about. The sacroiliac, if you said Josh, you're thinking maybe it's sacroiliac. Sacroiliac is actually going to be the correct answer here. The sacroiliac is going to be the joint between the sacrum and the iliac. And we're going to talk a little bit more, the ilium, sorry, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with the pelvis. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and get started with the sternoclavicular joint. So this is, I'm going to give you like one hint about how to use that joint template, and then it's all on you after that. So for example, right here, I would go ahead and start writing down the sternoclavicular joint, and I write that it's the saddle joint, and it allows for what type of movement, right? So like I said, saddle joint, and there's like a moderate amount of movement in the sternoclavicular joint. But does anyone know what directions the sternoclavicular joint moves in? What do we call those directions? So we have 4 different ways that the saddle joint can move.
Doesn't it like a saddle joint usually moves from front to back and side to side, but doesn't the clavicle usually just move front to back?
Thank you, Caitlin. Yes, so the saddle joint will move front to back and side to side, exactly right. And you can see this little anatomy tip that it's described that way because it's like sitting on a horse. You can move front to back, or your legs can move like this. So when we're talking about the sternoclavicular joint, it actually does move back and front as well, Caitlin. So we'll talk a little bit about that movement in a second. So yeah, so there's 4 different types of movements. So right now on your template, you should have it sternoclavicular and saddle joint. We'll get to the motions in a second. Okay, so here's that quick little complete anatomy activity I was talking about earlier. If you can go ahead and pull up complete anatomy, what I'd like you to do is make a screen with the left scapula and go ahead and add all these different labels for the scapula. You can either use the feature where you click once on the, if you go to tools, right, and then you go to label, you can either click once and it'll decide what the label is you're trying to get, or you can double tap and you can add your own labels. I'd recommend double tap so that you can actually type and spell and make sure you're practicing that. But go ahead and add these, 7 labels to your complete anatomy screen. I'll give you 5 minutes to do this activity. And then lastly, also indicate with the 3D pen, because we learned that if you use the 2D pen, it'll move it. With the 3D pen, go ahead and mark where the scapula will come into contact with the ribs, and then where the scapula will come into contact with the clavicle. So those are 2 separate spots. You can choose 2 different colors if you'd like, but just kind of mark in some form or fashion with one of the 3D pens those 2 connections. Any questions on this activity? And for glenoid, I'll go ahead and say you can say glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa. I don't know why it just says glenoid. Alrighty, I'll give you 5 minutes. So we'll meet up at 5:45. This is going to be an individual activity just to make sure everyone is aware of that. So you're just doing this on your own. Just a little bit of practice with the complete anatomy because I know that we can keep using, that's beneficial for us to keep practicing with complete anatomy. So this is on your own. And if you are having troubles with complete anatomy, just send me a message real quick. That's a great question, Presley. So when you put in labels, they don't actually, the line that it draws will not actually stay where you initially put it if you're rotating your model around. But the thing about labels is if you click the label, then you'll be able to see exactly what it's pointing to. So for this purpose, obviously, you're not going to be making like a 3D video of it. You're just going to be sending me a screenshot of what you have. So as much as you can, I'd say just keep it in place and then take a screenshot. If things get a little messed up, I'm trusting that you haven't just thrown labels up on the screen and that you've actually taken this seriously. Does that answer your question, Presley? The other thing you can do is you can use the 3D pen and you can draw over the line that the label makes, and then that line will stay. That's the other thing you can do. I know that the 3D pen gets slow though, so you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Yes, so you double click on whatever part you're trying to label and it'll show up a box that says like add whatever text you want. It's like an open box. And then if you're having problems, I'm messaging you right now, okay? If you're having problems with it or you're not done right now, then you can obviously turn this in later today. Just try to get it in by 11:59 tonight. And then if you had problems with opening complete anatomy or something's not working, hopefully that's not something that you're always experiencing and you're able to use it normally and you've had some exposure to complete anatomy. It's going to be really important as we get into muscles as well. But if it's not working, then you can go ahead and just use a Google image and then add labels to whoever messaged me. Okay. Alrighty, are we about done with that? Okay, can I get a thumbs up? Are we done? Feeling okay about that activity? Okay, let's see, thumbs up about like the usability of complete anatomy today. Is it getting better? Are we just kind of not our friend, or it's just, okay. I'm seeing somewhere here. All right, not letting me place labels. Okay. So yeah, the labels are a little tricky. When you're putting a label, double tap it, right, to give you like a blank space. like when I double click, nothing comes up. Huh, weird. Okay, so Juliet, we'll try to work on that maybe after class when we do the Kahoot. We'll try to see if we can troubleshoot that. And make sure you save that screen so that you have it for yourself and it's in your library. But if you're done with that, then you can go ahead and take a screenshot and you'll upload it to your Dropbox later today. Okay.
Wait,
Yes, go
when
ahead.
we screenshot, do we just screenshot it without the labels, or are we supposed to draw over them with the pen?
You don't have to draw them with the pen because I know the 3D pen is kind of funky. So like I said, I trust that you've put the labels accurately to where they actually go and that you haven't just thrown them on the screen. So just take a screenshot of that and then upload it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with the hopefully what yours looks like as well. And we'll go through a few of these forms. Okay, so first of all, I have a quick question for you, and this is where I hope that you are going to interact with me and answer. You can go ahead and just unmute yourself and shout it out, or if you want, you can use the chat, and Annie can help me with that. So what attaches the scapula and the clavicle? What is that joint called? Does anyone know? We kind of mentioned this when we were talking about that very first poll everywhere question.
Is it the acromion joint?
Yep, close, yeah. Okay, so it's called the acromioclavicular joint. And the reason why it's named that way, joints are actually very reasonably named, I'd say. They're named usually based on the two things they join, right? So the acromion is going to be this location right here, and that's why we've marked it in red. The acromioclavicular joint is going to be right here, and then we know the clavicle will attach to it. So what is the costal touching surface, of the scapula? What do we call this costal touching surface?
Is that like something like the fossa? That form that it should be the infraspinous fossa, because that looks like inward.
Very, very close, Didi. Yeah, so you're definitely right. It is a fossa, but it's not going to be the infraspinous fossa. Ooh, I hate turning these. Okay, so it's not going to be the infraspinous fossa. If I turn this around, does that change your view of it, Didi?
I guess a little bit.
A little bit? Okay, so let's talk about this a little. So right here, does anyone know what this bone is? This, bone part? What do we call this?
Is that the spine?
The spine, exactly. This is the spine. So the spine actually divides two fossa on the posterior side of our scapula. So one of them is going to be the supraspinous fossa. So if I click this, you can see it'll label us the supraspinous fossa. And then the other one is going to be, like you said, the infraspinous fossa. So these two are named as pairs, supra meaning above, infra meaning below, and they're going to be divided by this spine. And one way to remember that the spine is going to be on the posterior side is that our spine on our back is also on our posterior, right? So that helps me remember that it's going to be on the back side. So if we turn back around to the anterior view of our scapula, what would this fossa be? It is a fossa because fossa means what? What does fossa mean?
Like a hole or big, large space.
Yep, not a hole. So hole would be more like foramen or sorry, a few other words that we have there slipping my mind right now. But what is fossa? I think there's something happening in the chat. Shallow depression. Exactly. Yeah, shallow depression. So if you think back to the fossas that we had in our cranial cavity, right, we had those fossas that allowed for our lobes to sit in place. So a fossa is just a shallow little depression. So right here we have the subscapular fossa is going to be the costal touching surface. All right. So what muscles, and this is something that you might need to go back to your lab text, so go ahead and pull that up, and I want you to go hunting for these answers. So what muscles are housed within 3 fossas of the scapula? What muscles are housed within the 3 fossa? So we know the 3 fossa include the subscapular on the anterior side, and then we have the supraspinatus up here and the infraspinatus. So what are the muscles that are housed?
Is it the rotator cuff?
Yep, exactly right. It is the rotator cuff. I don't know who said that. Who was that? Who said that?
Sydney.
Sydney. Thank you so much, Sydney. Sometimes it doesn't pop up in my first four, like who talks, but thank you. Yes, so it's the rotator cuff muscles. Exactly right. And like I said, we don't need to know muscles right now, but you're getting yourself thinking, right? You're like, okay, muscles. The rotator cuff muscles are going to be somewhere around these fossa. That's going to be a great thing for us to keep in mind for lab 5. Okay. So you didn't have to label this, but I put it on my image. We have the supraglenoid tubercle, which is going to be this little bump right above the glenoid cavity or the glenoid fossa, right? So it's the glenoid fossa, and then we have this little tiny bump on the top portion, and we have another tiny bump on the bottom called the infraglenoid tubercle. So does anyone know what these are attachments for? What muscles are the attachments for? Thanks, Annie.
Is it the biceps and the triceps?
It is the biceps and the triceps, exactly right, yeah. So the supraglenoid is going to be for the biceps, the infraglenoid is going to be for the triceps. And again, we don't need to know really much about that right now, but we're already thinking, okay, so the reason that we have these tubercles is for a bicep attachment or a tricep attachment. Great. Okay, so real quick, which scapula is pictured right here? Is this the left or the right? Someone I haven't heard from today. Anyone remember? You might have done something different on yours, but what is this one? Left. Okay, I'm seeing left, I'm seeing right as well. Okay, so can someone who said left explain why you think it's the left scapula? Give us firm evidence for this being the left scapula. So I have Faith, Andy, Gospel, Sophia. Any of you want to give it a shot and explain why you think it's the left scapula?
Is it because the tubercle is on the left side, and that's where the humerus attaches to?
The tubercle?
Or like that little hole right there, I don't know.
This one?
Yes.
Okay, yes, exactly. So this is called the, does anyone remember what this is called? It's right here.
Glenoid.
Oh, the glenoid, yes.
Yeah, the glenoid cavity or the glenoid fossa, right? So we need to specify what it is, right? So fossa or cavity, either work. So exactly right, Sophia, this is where the humerus attaches, and we know that it's, oh, that's the door, okay. We know that it's the left because if we were looking at this, like we were talking about with the question about the fossa, we know that the subscapular fossa, so the side without the spine, is going to be anterior. So right now we're looking at it at someone's front side, front scapula. So if this was the front scapula, and then we know that the humerus attaches here, which I'm going to go ahead and just add that so you can visualize it. Wants to be slow. I want to kind of show you how you can use complete anatomy for studying and making sure, verifying your answers. So here we added the humerus, and we know that the humerus doesn't land on the middle, on the medial side of our body, right? It's on the lateral side. So then we can verify if this is the front and this is the humerus, which is going to be on the lateral side, then this has to be the left scapula. And another way to look at that, if this is not really making sense, is this is like the back view, and there would be another scapula right here. Does everyone kind of see how you can tell that it's the left scapula? Yes, that can be a little tricky. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is, because we verified that it is the left scapula, I'm going to go ahead and add the left clavicle and the sternum, so we can just really clearly, oops, I spelled that wrong. So we can really clearly see that joint. All right, so here we have the left scapula, the left humerus, and then we know that we said this red portion that we labeled, that's going to be the acromioclavicular joint. And this is going to be the acromial end of our clavicle, going to attach. This is going to be our sternal end of our clavicle, and this is going to form which joint? Does anyone remember? And if you don't remember, the fun thing about joints is that you can try to put it together. What's this portion? What's this bone called?
Okay, that's it. Sternoclavicular.
Exactly.
Someone said it in the
In the chat. Okay, perfect. Yes. Thank you both to everyone who answered. So sternoclavicular joint is going to be right here, exactly. And this is going to be where we see movement. We don't see very much movement at the acromioclavicular. We kind of refer to it as a fixed joint. So right now, unfortunately, we cannot see movement using complete anatomy because we haven't added any bones, or sorry, any muscles. But whenever we did add muscles starting in next lab, then we can actually use those muscles to see how things move. But before we do that, since we're not going to add muscles today, I'd like us to share my screen again. Okay, so I'd like us to start doing more of the acting out portion of today's lesson, where we're going to actually do the movements of the scapula. So if everyone can, it doesn't matter right or left, I don't care, but just put your hand on your clavicle, okay? Wherever you find your clavicle, and then we're going to do these motions, okay? So we're going to protract. The protract, does anyone remember protract? It's going to go like this, right? So we're going to pull our clavicle forward. So you might have to like lift your arm a little bit to feel that, and you can feel it going forward, right? And we can feel our scapula came forward as well. Now, if we retract, we're going to go backwards, and our scapula is actually going to move medially, and that's why in this picture we see this arrow going towards our spine. So if we go backwards, and we felt our clavicle move backwards, well, our scapula also moved backwards and closer to our spine and our back. Okay, everyone felt that? And then we have elevation and depression. So if we elevate, you can actually feel your clavicle, especially on the acromial end, move upwards, right? You can feel that movement. You can feel that your scapula has moved upwards. And then if we depress, we can feel our acromial end has gone down and our scapula has gone down as well. Does everyone feel that? Yeah? Okay, cool. I saw a few of us doing that, so that's great. And none of these exercises you actually have to do, of course, but I'd really recommend you do them. So if you can and you're willing to, please do. Great. Any questions about the scapula? It's kind of a bone we like to focus on. Okay, I'll go ahead and give you a question to see how well you retained this information. Waiting on about 7 more people. One more person get it in? All right, perfect. Okay, so a muscle that attaches from the mid-thoracic vertebrae, so T4 through T8, we're just kind of generalizing what this vertebrae might be, to the scapula would likely cause blank of the scapula. So what I really recommend in this question is, and hopefully you all did this, is you kind of thought to yourself, okay, so my vertebrae are back here, and I know T4 through T7 is somewhere maybe in line with my scapula, right? And if I have a muscle that is attached between the vertebrae in my thoracic area and my scapula, right? So like right about here, and I shorten that distance, what happens? I shorten that distance. Well, hopefully a lot of us thought that would be retracting, right? So let's see what we thought. Great. So a majority of us thought that it would retract the muscle. And does everyone see how we came across that answer? So again, we said that the T4 through T8, those vertebrae are generally in line with the scapula, maybe even a little bit lower. And we're going to draw a line between the scapula and those vertebrae. It's really hard to see when I'm not there in person. They're going to draw a line between those two vertebrae, and then that muscle is just going to contract it, and it's going to make that distance shorter. So by making that distance shorter, we have retracted the scapula, right? Okay. So let's do another activity just based on this question. Can anyone demonstrate? So go ahead and first say, I'm going to do it so that your image shows up for me. Can anyone demonstrate how to what happens if you depress the scapula. You can demonstrate, you can describe what, like a scenario where you would depress your scapula. Did I say that weirdly? I just need a volunteer to explain a scenario that you can do on your body to depress your scapula. You can act it out or you can just tell me. Anyone? Let's see what's happening in chat. Caitlin says when you sit back in a chair. When you sit back in a chair, so when you like go backwards like this, is that what we're saying, Caitlin?
Yeah, if like if the chair has like a backing to it that's tall.
Okay. So when I do that, I'm actually not really, personally, I'm not moving my scapula. When I sit back in a chair, I'm mostly just moving another joint, right, which we'll talk about later. Does anyone have a different idea?
Would it be like when you relax your shoulders?
When you relax your shoulders, yeah. That would definitely be when you depress your scapula, right? So you're really tense because you just took an exam and then you depress your shoulders. That would definitely help you to depress your scapula. The standard ballet posture orders you to depress your scapula as much as you can. I don't know if it counts. Exactly, FA, that's definitely a thing as well. I don't know if you do ballet, that sounds awesome. I also used to dance, so yes, you have to keep your scapula down, right? And you keep your shoulder down. If it's up like this, what would that be called? Elevation, yep. So this is elevation, and then this is going to be depression. Great. Pull-ups, do pull-ups count? Is pull-up this way or this way? This way, right? Gospel, where are you at? I think it's this way. It's this way. Yeah, I think it could count, right? And you know, Gospel, we'll be able to clarify that more accurately when we go into muscles, because we'll be talking about those muscles that do these motions on the scapula. But yeah, pull up will count. Right. Can someone describe to me an action or demonstrate an action that you would do to protract your scapula? Anyone have any idea?
Hugging someone.
Someone, yeah, that's a great one, Nicole. Yeah, I like that one. Okay, cool. The complete opposite of hugging someone, which is something, for some reason, anatomy likes this example, is swinging your arm like boxing. That would also be protracting. I like hugging. That's a nice one too. Cool. So hugging or swinging your arm forward would be protracted. Okay, how are we feeling on the scapula right now? Doing okay? It's so hard to see everyone's faces like this. I hope everyone's doing okay. I'm gonna try to make this let's go by easy, hopefully. Okay. All right, so we're gonna jump right into the glenohumeral joint. And we mentioned this in the very first poll everywhere that we had. And we're talking about, well, what joint connects the axial and the appendicular skeleton? So it's not the glenohumeral, but the glenohumeral is really important. So it is one of our ball and socket joints, and it allows for ample freedom. Does anyone know why the ball and socket is considered one of our most most liberal joint, honestly, in our whole body? It really has a lot of freedom. Does anyone know why?
Is it because it has like the greatest range of motion?
Yes, and why does it have the greatest range of motion?
There's less corners for there to be damage.
Less corners, yeah. So less corners, what's another way to say that? These are all great examples or great answers. Anyone know what less corners, what's a different way to say that?
Could you say like the least articulation?
Least articulation, that could work too. So basically all of us are kind of going around this point of a very shallow ball and socket joint, right? So least articulations, there's really not that much surface that this ball and socket is touching. It's not stuck very deeply in the joint, so it's not got limited motion by the edges. And it is a ball and socket joint, like we said. So it's one of those joints that has 3 planes of motion, and this picture right here shows those motions as well. And we know with our shoulder, if we swing it, we can pretty much go all the way around, unlike with our leg or our knee, joints like that. Okay, and here are a few quick parts of the humerus to note. And so just note that the lesser tubercle is going to be the more anterior tubercle. And then we have this intertubercular groove and then the greater tubercle. And this is the anterior view. So we know that the subscapular fossa is right here. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing that we just did. We're going to act this out together. So if everyone can abduct their humerus for me. What was abducting their humerus? What would that be? Anyone want to just do it so I can see? Is anyone doing it? Yep, I see a few of us. Okay, thank you, Emma. Thank you, Dominic, Caitlin. Yep, so this is abduct. Abduction is going to be removing, right? In my high school anatomy, we used to say you're abducting someone, right? You're taking it away. Adducting, adding it back to the body is going to be what? Coming back in, exactly. So it's just the opposite of abduction. And it's really important that we keep these two clear. They're going to come up a few more times, so I'm going to go a little slow right now, and then we'll get faster when we see them again. Okay, so extension. What's extension going to look like? Yep, I'm seeing a few of us doing it. Great. Oh. I just want to wait for a second. Okay, yes. So extension is going to be pushing our arm to the back, right? So if we were reaching for something behind us. What about flexion of the humerus? What's that going to look like? Right? Yep. I think I see Annie doing it. Yes, so we're going to be reaching in front of us. It's going to be the exact opposite of extension. Medial rotation, what's medial rotation going to look like? Just make sure you know how to do it, what it feels like. Turning in, right? So you're turning yourself in, and then lateral rotation is going to be turning out, right? Okay. Medial and lateral can also be called internal and external rotation as well. Is that what I meant to do? Okay, I have a question for you all. And if someone can unmute themselves or add this to the chat. Can you move in more than one plane of motion in the humerus at once?
Yes.
Yes? Can you give me an example?
If you were to raise your arm, so do flexion and then also have it rotating.
Yep. We're flex it and rotate it, right? So if you're saying, can I have whatever you're reaching for, right? At this point, I have rotated my arm. Well, actually, this is an anatomical plane. So maybe if I'm reaching this way, if I've rotated it and I'm flexing forward, that will be two types of planes of motion that we're moving our arm in. So yes, you can definitely do a combination of these, and we tend to split them up a lot of times just because it makes it a lot easier to think about in these questions that you're going to be asked. Rarely you're going to have to, explain a motion that is abducting and doing this and doing that. But just keep in mind that you can combine these different planes of motion to do all the things that our arms can do. Okay. I think we have a poll everywhere question. So this is going to be, I'm going to pause the timer so you all have plenty of time to read this question. And this is one of those questions where we're again talking about a muscle. So remember, a muscle connects between the shortest path between two bones and will contract to then shorten that distance even further. Need about 7 more people. We'll go ahead and start the timer. Yep, just waiting on a few more, 3 more. Last person get your answer in? Few more seconds. I need one more person. Just want to make sure you get counted. All right, there we go. Okay, so a muscle that attaches from the subscapular fossa. We talked about this one a lot, right? It's the fossa that articulates with the costal surface. So a muscle that attaches from the subscapular fossa to the lesser tubercle will cause blank of the shoulder joint. Let's see how we did. We have a lot of disagreement with this question, which is great. That means we have a lot of different thought processes. So can I have someone explain whichever one, whatever answer choice you chose, if you feel confident enough to explain it, go ahead and unmute yourself and try to justify why you think that is a correct answer. And I would love some live demonstrations. So if you can really show us what you were thinking, that would be great. Who's brave enough? Oh, I have so many people I haven't heard from yet. Come on.
I can go if no one else does.
All right, we'll hear it, Nicole.
Okay, so I was thinking like posteriorly your subscapular fossa is like up here and the lesser tubercle is on the medial side of the humerus. And so like if it were to contract, it would like pull your shoulder in. So I said internal rotation.
That was a pretty good justification. I like it, Nicole. Does anyone have any other thought process? I know we have another thought process because we have so many, such a wide variety of answers. So someone else had a different thought process. I want to hear it. What else were we thinking? And it's really good for us to talk through our thought processes, even if we don't know if the answer is correct, because it helps us to understand where our thinking might lead us astray and where we can avoid that next time. Can anyone who said abduction explain why you said abduction?
I said abduct just because I was like picturing here. Can you see me?
Mm-hmm.
I can't really see my camera, so I don't know what this looks like, but I was picturing like the muscle attaching here and like me being able to like abduct my arm a little bit, but
okay.
Kind of like, I forget who said it, but I like the explanation for internal rotation a little better. Okay,
so we like Nicole's explanation. All right. Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing your different thinking process. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and reveal the answer. So the answer is actually internal rotation. Great job, Nicole. And that thought, your explanation was exactly right. So our subscapular fossa is going to be, if I'm just using my body as an example, it's going to be somewhere around here, right? And like you said, our lesser tubercle is going to be the one more medially, right? They're both kind of on this lateral edge, but it's not going to be the further lateral one. It's going to be the one closer to our medial axis. So if we have a muscle from this portion to this portion, right, and we're drawing a straight line between those two, and we shorten that, then yes, we're definitely going to, if you're even wearing a shirt that you can just pull on it, you can really feel how if you shorten this distance, you would then cause internal rotation. Another really good thing about this question to keep in mind is when it says from blank to blank. So the from is going to be what we call the origin, and the to is going to be what we call the insertion. I don't want to get too ahead of us for muscles, but the alternative thinking process for this, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is that it's not that the tubercle is pulling on the subscapular fossa. That wouldn't really make sense, right? Because that'd be our humerus pulling on our whole body. But it's actually vice versa, right? It's our subscapular fossa pulling on this lesser tubercle, which causes that internal rotation. So you can see how you don't even need to know anything about muscles, and you can use your knowledge of bones to actually figure out what is happening. Okay. Keep moving. So we're going to talk a bit about the elbow, and the elbow has a lot of fascinating features to it. It actually has 3 joints, right? And we can consider there to be a 4th joint if we talk about the radio-ulnar joints. So the first joint we'll talk about is the humeral-ulnar joint, and that is a hinge joint. So what is a hinge joint? What types of motions do we have in a hinge joint?
Extension and flexion.
Thank you, Gretchen. Extension and flexion. And so with a hinge, it's really just going to have that one plane of motion. And you can even make a hinge with your hand and just see, and then make a ball, and you can really just go one way, right? So that's our hinge joint. The ulna is such a great example of a hinge. You can really see how clearly the ulna cradles the humerus, and that forms that hinge joint. Okay, the next one we talk about is the humeroradial joint. The humeroradial joint is a ball and socket. It's a very unique ball and socket, actually. So what types of motion does this ball and socket humeroradial joint produce? And this is a joint right here. What type of motion? Hint, hint on the slide.
Ball and socket.
So it's a ball and socket, yep. And what are the motions that it will produce?
Extension, flexion, pronation, and supination.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Caitlin. So extension, flexion, pronation, and supination. So we just talked about ball and socket though with the glenohumeral joint, and it had a third plane of motion, right? We had 6 different things that we could do. How come this one can only do these 4 things?
Do the muscles restrict the plane of motion it can do?
Not the muscles. There's something else that does restrict it though, Josh.
Is it the ulna?
It's the ulna. Yep, it's the ulna. So unlike the glenohumeral, where a humerus is just a free range bone to do whatever motion it wants to do, the radius is very constricted by the ulna. And we know that the radius fits into this notch in the ulna. And if you actually take your hand right now and you're in anatomical position, so your palm is facing forward, and you rotate it, so you pronate and supinate, you can feel how there's a limit. There's a stopping point where you really cannot rotate anymore. And it might feel like the muscles, but it's actually that bone is crossing over itself and it can't cross anymore. So that ulna is really restricting the ball and socket movement that we would normally see for this radial joint. Okay. And then the last 2 joints we'll talk about for this one is the proximal radial ulnar joint and then the distal radial ulnar joint. So the proximal radial ulnar joint is what type of joint?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Did both of the joints on the last page do all 4 of those movements?
No, that's a great question.
Oh, I couldn't see the bottom there.
Oh,
sorry.
Yes, that was a great question though. So both of these do not do pronation and supination. Only the radial ulnar is contributing to that pronation and supination. And the reason for that is because the ulna stays in place. And it's a hinge joint, so it only has that one plane of motion. So it really stays in place, and its job in terms of contributing to the humeroradial joint is just to restrict the radius. It's going to stop that motion. Thank you for that question, Nicole. Did that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
So what type of joint is the proximal radial ulnar joint? Chat. Pivot joint. Yes, thank you. So it is definitely a pivot joint, and it has 2 motions that it will make, pronation and supination. So we're back at pronation and supination, and it's the second joint that will contribute to that pronation and supination. So right now we have the proximal radial ulnar and the humeroradial. Those are the only 2 that pronate and supinate. And yeah, and then the important thing to note about the proximal radial ulnar joint is where it is. So I don't know if you can see this very clearly. You might have to go to your lab text as well just to confirm that you can see this. But we can see right here the ulna directly attaching to the humerus. We can see that joint very clearly. We can see the humerus connecting to the radius very clearly as well in this ball and socket. We know this is the capitulum touching that radial head. But that radial notch is going to be located on the ulna. So it's called the radial notch. It's a notch on the ulna for the radius, right? So it's the radial notch of the ulna where the radial head is going to fit in and do that pivot motion. So that's going to contribute to that third, it's contributing to the pronation and supination, I'm sorry. Okay, and here, this is just a cartoon of that motion, but I think it's easier to just do it on yourself and really feel how that bone is being restricted. Are there any questions in the chat?
Was there any movement for the distal radial ulnar?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the distal radial ulnar joint is actually a fixed joint, and we can see it right here. It doesn't do any motion. And you might be thinking, well, then how does our wrist move, right? Well, that's a completely different joint. So the joint that forms between the radius and the ulna, that's right here. And you can see that it's actually not articulating with the wrist at all. The wrist joint is going to be something else to talk about. But the distal radial ulnar joint is going to be another one of those fixed joints like the acromioclavicular. All right, feeling okay on the elbow? So real quick, I have 2 questions for you all, and you can answer in the chat or you can unmute yourself and shout it out. Which bone contains the process that fits into the coronoid fossa? So again, which bone contains the process that fits into the coronoid fossa? Anyone have any idea? Ulna. Yep, ulna, exactly right. So go ahead and feel on your arm. So really quickly, does anyone know which finger will give you the indication of the ulna? Is it the pinky or the thumb when we're trying to find which is the radius and the ulna? Which finger gives us the indication? Pinky. Yep, exactly. So we can follow our pinky down in anatomical position, so when our palm is facing up, and that's going to be our ulna. So our ulna is right here in anatomical position. It's going to be on the medial side, and our radius is going to be on the lateral side. So the question was, which process fits into the coronoid fossa? So the ulna is going to have on it the coronoid process. The coronoid process is a process that fits into the coronoid fossa of the humerus, right? So when we're flexing, it's able to fit into that fossa. What about which bone contains the process that fits into the radial fossa? Which bone contains the process that fits into the radial fossa of the humerus? What do we think? I don't want to make this dry, but I really want us to make sure we're practicing. So if you can answer, that'd be great.
I'm gonna take a guess and say the radius.
Thank you for guessing. Guessing is fine, especially when it's educated, right? And we talked about the radial fossa, so that's probably the radius, exactly. So the radial fossa is going to be right next to the coronoid fossa. It's also going to be on the anterior side of the humerus. And again, those 2 processes will fit into those fossas when we flex. If this is sounding a little hard to follow at the moment, don't worry, there's going to be a case study on it, so you're going to get a little bit of practice. Here's one last question on the fossas. So which bone contains the process that fits into the olecranon fossa? And again, I really highly recommend you're looking in your lab text and you're trying to find these answers so that it helps you. Kyle, I like it. I'm seeing you over there trying to figure out what's going on. Ulna, exactly. So the ulna is going to have that olecranon process that fits into the olecranon fossa of the humerus, right? And if you want to go ahead and feel just like Kyle was doing, if you're like me and you have a really bony elbow, that's probably your olecranon process, right? And so when you're flexing, it's sticking way out and it's not actually fitting in its fossa. But when you extend, you can feel that your arm is almost completely flat because that process, like a puzzle piece, fits into that fossa and is suddenly now a nice level surface. Okay. So those 3 processes and fossas are really important because they give us the range of motion that we have in our elbow. If we didn't have this fossa, our bones might get stuck before we're able to fully extend. So it's really important that we have those fossas. Vice versa for when we flex, we might not be able to flex as much as we are able to. Okay, Again, go back to your lab text and see if you can find this answer. So what are the radial tuberosity and the ulnar tuberosity used as an attachment for? So what muscles are the radial tuberosity and the ulnar tuberosity used as an attachment for?
The strong flexor muscles.
Yep, I just saw Brandon type that in as well, and Josh, and I think that was Caitlin. Great job. So the strong flexor muscles. That means nothing to us right now, right? But when we get to lab 5, we'll actually know what that means a little bit more. But it is important to know flexor muscles probably flexes the bone, right? So that's something that's really going to be helpful for us. So flexor muscles are going to attach to these radial tuberosities and the ulnar tuberosity. And you can see it in this picture right here. This is the radial tuberosity, and this is the ulnar tuberosity. Okay. And then lastly, I believe everyone was doing this, but we'll just run through this really quickly. So let's just do our demonstration. So what would be flexion of the elbow? Make sure you're trying it. Try flexing, and then try extending, right? And think about what fossas are fitting where. Okay, and then try pronating. And I think this was Kyle in the chat. I just closed the chat. Made a good point about how do you remember pronation and supination. So supination, it's like you're holding a bowl of soup, right? Supination, soup, and pronation, you throw it like this. So Kyle's way is that you pour the soup out. So your hands are going to be down, your palms are down. Remember, everything is relative to anatomical position. So I'm sitting here like this. That might not really mean much to you, but if we were in an anatomical position, we're supine because our hands are facing forward. So you see how that just connects? But we're not pronated because that is not anatomical position. So our anatomical position is supinated. Okay, that put us in a good place to go ahead and get started on the first case study that we have. We only have 2 case studies today. The second one is supposed to be a really fun, relaxing case study if you've already taken a look at it. And so go ahead and pull that up and start looking at it while I make the groups. Let me stop share. Okay. Oh, no. Move to, So today's breakout rooms are going to be the last time that we are in these groups. And then we will be rotating next week. Sorry, I want to make sure to get everyone in their group. Okay. 4. We go 4. And if you've already taken a look at the case study and you're ready to go on that, then if you've not finished your activity for the scapula, go ahead and work on that. Just one more second here. Gospel, do you remember what group? Oh, you're in 4. Okay. Millie, Presley, and then Sophia. Okay. Group 6. 5. Okay. Emily, Faith, Josh, Caitlin. Okay. Cover everyone where they should be. Okay. Let me know if that looks right, if you're in the right group. They're the same numbers as last week, so if it's not the right one, just stay back. Brandon, that dog. Oh my God. Are you in the right group, Brandon, or did I put you in the wrong one?
It looks like it's the right group, actually.
Okay,
Cool.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks for showing me your dog. PD, are you in the right group? Oh, I can't hear you. Okay. Ashley, I'm good. Or sorry, not Ashley. Annie, I'm gonna move you to group 2 since I only have 3 people today. If that's okay. Just want to give you a heads up before I moved you anywhere. Okay. Oh. Alrighty, are y'all all set? Andy's like, we're done doing this case study stuff. This is really the only case we have to do today. So if you can get through it, then we'll be good.
I think we might be missing someone.
You are missing someone, but she is not here this week. So I'm putting Annie in the group so that you have one more person to talk to and bounce ideas off of.
Cool.
Hi guys.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I was having audio issues.
Hey, we all good here? Have you all met your 6th group partner? Brandon.
Oh, the dog.
Has a very cute dog over there.
His name is Cody. He's a husky golden retriever.
Oh, that's such a cute combo.
Yeah, he's a good boy.
Alrighty, well, if you need any help, just let me know. Okay, do we have everyone? Almost. Okay, so I called everyone back. Hopefully everyone got a chance to go through these questions. I know there was a few questions on 3, 4, and 5, so I want to still talk about those a little bit. I think I talked to 2 groups about question 3, so if anyone from those groups would like to try to explain to us what answer you got and why you are very confident that's the answer, explain it as if you're trying to explain to someone who didn't really understand what was going on in this question. So any volunteers? So we're going to teach the class why question 3 is what it is. Anyone? I know there are 2 groups who know exactly what the answer is, and they have a very good reason why, because they talked to me about it, and we came up with some good answers.
I guess our group can do it. So
Okay, thank you, Brandon.
We discussed that the olecranon, how do you pronounce that again?
So I've heard it a few different ways. Olecranon is how I pronounce it. I've also heard it olecranon.
Okay.
Either way is fine. They both spell the same way.
Got it. So we basically learned that that's on the anterior or the posterior side of your arm, and that the coronoid is on the anterior side. So when, I guess, at rest, like when your ulna is flat faced out, it will be on the anterior side, so it would match that of the coronoid.
When you're, you said when your elbow is flexed.
When you're flexed, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Thank you. So the answer is coronoid process for this question, and just like Brandon said, our olecranon is the opposite side. It's on the posterior side. It's this big bone that when we extend, it's going to fit into its fossa. But when we flex, we can consider that our coronoid process and our radial process are going to be in their fossas on the anterior side of our humerus. And someone also asked a great question about, well, does that mean that the puzzle is completely fitting in if we're only extended 90 degrees? And the answer is no, right? So even though we're saying that the coronoid process is fitting in its fossa, of course we know that that's not completely fit in, because if it was completely, if this is the limit of how far our process fit into the fossa, then we wouldn't be able to flex further than this. But a lot of us can flex a lot further, right? And so we can see that this range of motion is due to the fact that that process fits into that fossa, and it's giving it space to do it. And if we didn't have either of those parts, then we would have a lot smaller range of motion in our arms. Thank you, Brandon. Any questions on 3? No? Okay. Let's talk about 4. So I didn't talk to too many groups about 4, but I know that group 6 had the right answer, and I think a few other people had a good answer. So would anyone like to explain question 4? So the question says that the patient is able to straighten and bend her elbow a little bit with only some pain, but attempting to turn her hand over results in excruciating pain. So what is this, at which joint is the most significant dislocation? Anyone have an answer and an explanation? You can even break it up. You can say, I know this is the answer, but I don't know what the explanation is.
Since the most pain was since when we tried to rotate the hand, we thought it will be the proximal radial ulna that allows the supination and pronation.
Yes, thank you, F.A. So the proximal radial ulnar joint is going to be the major site of pronation and supination, right? So we can definitely say that that's going to be the most significant dislocation in this person, in this patient. Now, what about 5? So which bony landmarks would you expect to see separated other than what we already talked about? So that primary site of dislocation, which was the proximal radial ulnar joint. So we know that that's probably dislocated. What else might be dislocated? What else contributes to the reason that this person is feeling this pain? So what plane of motion, what motions are causing the pain in the patient? Just off the case study.
Rotation.
Rotation, pronation and supination. And what 2 joints do pronation and supination?
Humeroradial joint and proximal radial ulnar joint.
Great job, Matt. Yep. So all except for the humeral ulnar joint will do pronation and supination, exactly. So then what would be the answer for what bony landmarks would you expect to see separated? So Matt's told us that the 2 joints that do pronation and supination are the proximal radial ulnar joint and the humeroradial, but we want to know what bony landmarks are separated. What could it be?
My group said radial head as one answer.
Radial head is one answer, yep. Do you have another answer?
Capitulum.
Capitulum, exactly, yeah. So the capitulum and the radial head form that joint that we call the humeroradial joint. And we already said that the primary dislocation is going to be in that radial ulnar joint, but the secondary dislocation might be happening between the radial head and the capitulum. For your just benefit, knowledge, this type of injury is called a nursemaid's elbow, and it happens a lot in young children. So if you carry a child by their hand and you pick them up and you're just pulling on their elbow, it can cause that dislocation between the radius and the capitulum. So it's a really common injury because there's this thing called an annular ligament that will really just hold that radius in place, and it's not a very stable joint. So Caitlin says I used to get this all the time. Yeah, so it's a really common injury, and that's kind of what's happening in this scenario. All right, so I know there was a few people who had questions on 4 and 5. Did we answer those questions? Group 4 especially, are we feeling okay? Can I get a thumbs up how we're feeling on this information? So like I told the other groups, we're pretty much done with the serious case study for today. We're going to take a few minutes to go through some of the lower limb. Oh, actually, we still have to do the wrist. So let's keep moving. Okay, so we're not going to do a break since that went a little longer. I'm sorry. If you need to grab a break, obviously, you can just turn off your computer and go to the bathroom or whatever you need to do. But we'll go ahead and do a pull everywhere first. This is going to be a recall question, and then we're going to talk about the wrist and the carpals. Make sure you get your answer in. I have 3 more people. Two more. Go ahead and get your answer in. Thanks, Annie. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it. Okay, so which of these is not in the proximal row of carpals? So exactly like Annie said, this would be a great time to pull out that mnemonic. Some levers tried positions would be our proximal row, and that they can't handle will be our distal row, right? And proximal, remember, closer to our body, and distal further away. So that they can't is going to be representing your capitulum, so that's going to be the correct answer. I'll go into the next slide where we're going to talk a little bit more about this. So the carpals, again, the proximal row from lateral to medial, I would really recommend you go ahead and pull up your hand, just hold it up and really walk through these bones because they can be confusing, especially when you look at it from the palmar surface and the like the pronated version of it, like this way. When you see it from this way, that will look different. So make sure you're really orienting yourself on how this picture is. So it's going to be the palmar surface, which means, and our thumb is going to be to the right. So that means it's going to be our right hand, right? So follow along. We have our scaphoid. And then we have our lunate, we have our trapezium and our pisiform. So that's going to form our proximal row. And our distal row, and this mnemonic starts again on the right side, is going to be the trapezium, the trapezoid, the capitate, and the hamate. Okay, so make sure you can do that on your hand in different orientations so that you don't get confused about a picture that you find in a quiz. So you can use some levers try positions that they can't handle. You can also use, what does this say? So long to pinky, here comes the thumb. So long to pinky, here comes the thumb. It's going to be a different order, so just make sure you're keeping that straight. But this first mnemonic is going to be right to left and then right to left. And another thing to note is that we have this little thing called our hook of hamate, and you can actually palpate it on your hand. Sometimes that's helpful for orienting yourself and figuring out which side of the, if you kind of forget which side of the bone you're on. I feel like I have 2 hook of hamates because I'm just a bony person. So that's obviously not true. For me, it doesn't really work. But for you, if you can palpate that hopohamate, then that'd be great. Okay, so when we talk about our wrist joint, we call it our radiocarpal joint. So it makes sense. It's the joint formed between our radius, which is right here, and our carpals. So the radiocarpal joint allows for adduction. So kind of do this with me. Abduction is going to be away. Adduction is coming back towards, right? Extension. So again, if we're in anatomical position, extension is going to be going to the back, and then flexion is coming forward. Adduction, abduction, extension, flexion. We have a lot of movement in our flexion and not so much on our adduction, abduction. And then we have our metacarpophalangeal joints. So those are going to be the joints that are formed right here on our knuckles. And if you look at a picture like this, you might be inclined to feel like, oh, this is our finger, right? Don't get confused. This part is our palm, right? So this is our first knuckle that we can feel. This whole thing right here is our palm. So our metacarpophalangeal joints allow for, again, adduction. So we have a different axial line when we're talking about the fingers. So we draw the line between our third finger, and when we abduct, we go away from our third finger. When we adduct, we come back towards our third finger. And when we extend, again, we go backwards. You can't extend your fingers if they're quite extended, obviously. And then flexion. So flexion, extended, abduction, adduction. Okay. And lastly, we have our interphalangeal joints. So those actually only allow for extension and flexion. I don't know many people who can, other than your metacarpophalangeal joints, I don't know many people who can move these joints side to side. And if you can, then very interesting. Okay, so here's 3 more joints to add to your list. Any questions on the wrist and the digits? I think we have a pull everywhere coming up. For this type of question, I don't know if we've done anything like this before. You just click in the general area. I think we did actually. We did this in the first lab, right? So just click in the general area of a metacarpophalangeal joint of the second digit. Okay, so let's see how we did. So it looks like we have a dense clicks, a lot of clicks right here on this joint. We have a few down here, and then we have one up here. So I'm just going to talk about these 3 really quickly. So what are these joints down here? Anyone know? What are these joints? So they're going to be the joints between our carpals or the joints between our metacarpal and our carpals, right? So these are not going to be a metacarpophalangeal joint. When we see this word phalangeal, we think of a phalange, right? So this is our phalange. So the metacarpophalangeal joint would be any of these joints between the metacarpal and the phalange. So then we have this one, which is the right answer. That is exactly correct. This is going to be the second digit. So a lot of us got that correct. And then this is going to be the joint that we're talking about. This joint, does anyone know what this joint is called? See someone in the chat. PIP, yeah, what does PIP stand for? I like that they're named Pip and Dip. I think that's kind of cute. But the full name is the proximal interphalangeal joint. I think someone just said that in the chat. Okay, great. And then one more pull everywhere, same type of deal. You just click in the area. Second digit that can extend, flex, but not abduct or adduct. let's see how we did. So a second joint, or sorry, second digit, so a lot of us got that good. And that can flex, extend, but not abduct or adduct. And we know that the only joint in our in this portion in our wrists and our fingers that does not abduct or adduct is going to be our PIP or our DIP. So this is our distal interphalangeal joint, and this is our proximal phalangeal joint. And it's on the second digit, so these two would be correct answers. Okay, switching gears to the pelvis, so the lower portion of our skeleton, and we talked about this in the very beginning of class. We have this sacroiliac joint, which joins the sacrum, which is part of our axial skeleton, with the ilium right here, right? So that'll form the sacroiliac joint. And this is a fixed joint, so we cannot move. We don't have any range of motion right here. This will just be, it'll just remain fixed all of our lives. And does anyone know what the word coxa refers to? What is a coxa? When we refer to coxa, it refers to 3 bones. Does anyone remember what those bones are?
Is one the coccyx?
No, one is not the coccyx, but thank you for answering, Caitlin.
The pubis?
The pubis is one of them, yep. What else?
Something with an eye.
Something with an eye. Ischium, okay. What else? One more.
Ilium.
Ilium, exactly. So these are the 3 that form the coxa, right? And we have this term coxa because we form this joint between these 3 bones, and then these 2 coxa on both sides are then joined by this pubic symphysis. So coxa refers to this combination of these 3 bones, right? So there's a lot of different terms on this slide that I think are really helpful, and I actually had an activity where we were going to label the pelvis. I thought that we would run out of time, so it's completely fine that we won't get to this today, but I really would recommend that you take some time and do this activity. So if you can find time this week while you're studying, pull up Complete Anatomy and go ahead and try to label all of these things. I really recommend you use the labels that you make on your own so that you're not using Complete Anatomy to give you the answers directly. So see if you can do this activity and see how it goes. There are a lot of different terms that refer to the pelvis. We're not going to go over all of them right now, but if you have any questions, you can always email me. I think these are mostly very straightforward, just identification. Okay, so the hip joint is very, very similar to our glenohumeral joint. It is a ball and socket, and it has these 6 planes of motion, and we don't need to do it right now, but of course, like I said, we already know what these types of motions look like, so you can always practice on your own and make sure you really understand how to do these motions. Keep in mind that when we're talking about the hip joint, it is tempting to say that if you kick your leg back, you kick your, like a kick, you kick your leg back, that could be extension, but that's not going to be even referring to our hip joint, right? So keep hip joint and knee joint separate. Sometimes and a lot of times they work together, but just make sure you're aware of what the question is asking you. So if we extend on the hip and not the knee, we're taking the entire leg back because we're taking the femur back. So we can extend both our hip and flex our knee at the same time to really kick our knee back to our butt, or sorry, our ankle back to our butt. Okay, so yeah, 6 planes of motion right here. And like we talked about with the glenohumeral joint, we have less motion than we do with the glenohumeral because we have a deeper cavity, right? The acetabulum is really deep. It really allows for the head of the femur to have plenty of stability, and this makes sense. Our legs are taking on a lot of weight. Okay, so before we do this question, I'll point out really quickly the greater trochanter and the lesser trochanter. So like we talked about in the humerus, there's a lot of parallels here, right? So the humerus had the lesser and the greater tubercle. And then we know that between those ran the intertubercular groove. However, here we have the lesser and the greater trochanter. So trochanter just is a greater tubercle. It's a larger tubercle. So right here we have the greater tubercle, or sorry, the greater trochanter. And right here we have the lesser trochanter. So the lesser trochanter is going to be on the medial side of our femur, and the greater trochanter is going to be on the lateral side of our femur. So keep those 2 in mind. Okay, so let's do a poll everywhere question. I'm going to open up a little longer since I didn't get everyone. And this is one of those questions that really gets our brain thinking on how do these muscles attach between these different bone parts. Okay, one more person. I'm going to give you 2 seconds. There we go. Okay, so a muscle that attaches from the iliac fossa to the lesser trochanter would cause flexion and blank of the hip joint. So if you're wearing long pants, this is even better. I'm wearing shorts, so it's not going to be the greatest, but go ahead and if you would like, stand up and let's try to demonstrate this. So our iliac fossa is going to be this little depression that's in our ilium. We know that depression is somewhere in this general area. Of course, you can't palpate it because it's hidden between all this other stuff, but we know our iliac fossa is somewhere around here, and our shortest path to our lesser trochanter is just going to cross down this way, right? So if we were to draw this path and then shorten it, so if you're wearing pants, I'm wearing shorts again, so it doesn't work, but if you were to shorten this, what's going to happen? So this iliac fossa stays in place. The shortening is going to happen from the lesser trochanter, and if you notice, what happens is what? Anyone know? Let's see what we thought. What happens when I do this? Can you see me? I don't even know if you can see me. Let me. Nope, you can't see me. Okay. So if we were from the fossa, iliac fossa, to this lesser trochanter, and I was pulling up on that, so I was shortening that distance. Okay, so we have the demonstration. We've seen what it might be, and it looks like a lot of us thought it was internal rotation. From what I did, it seems like it could be what? External rotation, exactly. So when I was looking at this question, I also thought internal rotation would be a valid answer. What is really important to do in these types of questions is first identify where the two attachments of this muscle is, iliac fossa and lesser trochanter. We got that. We know where those two things are. Now let's draw the shortest path between those two. We drew that, right? So we went just straight from our iliac fossa to the lesser. We didn't go around, right? We didn't go from the back side. We went straight from the front down. Okay, we got that. Third thing, if we're going to shorten that distance from keeping the top attachment in place, right? We call that top attachment the origin. We keep that origin or the iliac fossa in place, and we shorten that distance so that the lesser trochanter is the one that is moving. We're going to externally rotate. So you see how sometimes acting it out actually helps you find the answer to these questions. We had a lot of extension as well. And what would be a good reason why extension doesn't work? What about this question tells us extension cannot be the answer? There's just one word in this question that really says, you know what, extension, I have to cross that out. You cannot be it. Flexion, exactly. The question says that this muscle flexes. So a muscle cannot flex and extend. It cannot do it. It won't ever do that. Antagonistic muscles or muscles that do the opposite things, they will do the opposite motions, but the same muscle cannot do the opposite motion, right? So we know flexion and extension are opposite. It cannot be extension. We can just cross that off immediately. Are we seeing how to break down questions like this? Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I quite understand where these stuff are going, but isn't the ilium fossa kind of like oriented towards the front of the body, so it's kind of like curved this way, and the other one, what's it called, the lesser trochanter is on the back. So like how exactly are we connecting the two?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you're exactly right about where the iliac fossa is. It's kind of like, if I was just kind of showing what the hip would look like, it kind of curves a little bit in and faces a little bit forward. But the lesser trochanter is not actually going to be on the back. It's going to be more medial is what so you can see it right here. Here it is here, and then here it is when we're looking at it from the side. So it's not really back, it's really more medial. And we can consider the greater trochanter to be more lateral. So then if we were to attach, from here to here, and then we were to shorten that distance. So there's actually a muscle. This is a foreshadowing into lab 6, but there's actually a muscle that covers this entire fossa, right? It just lays across this entire fossa and then it attaches right here at the lesser tubercle. So if this muscle were to contract, it would pull on this lesser tubercle, it would pull it forward, which would cause this external rotation. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I just like, if they didn't say flexion, I would have not guessed that. I would have thought that maybe it came from the back and like was an extension.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. So, so reading the question entirely, sometimes when you see these words like, well, it flexes and it does this, right? The primary function of the this muscle that I'm talking about is actually not external rotation. It is flexion. But this is just trying to show you how you can use really just the attachments and understanding how muscles work to figure out the function, right? So we don't have to sit here and memorize everything. We can actually kind of decipher it sometimes. I'm seeing everyone. Go ahead. If you want to go ahead and change your answer, that's completely fine. It's not going to change anything, but all right. Okay, we're going to keep going.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the knee joint, like I said, keep this very different from the hip joint. If you see questions that have to do with legs, really think, is this the hip, is this the knee, or is it both at the same time? And keep those separate. Okay, so the different thing about this hinge joint in the knee is that when you extend and you flex, and you can go ahead and you can just do this if you're sitting down or if you want to stand up, you can really feel how when you flex, well, funny enough, you don't go forward like you do with your arm, right? You go backwards. That's how we can do a butt kick. So flexion is going to be the opposite in the knee than it is in the elbow. And the elbow is that parallel joint, right? So it's the opposite direction. Flexion goes backwards. Extension is when we bring our leg forward, back to straight. Okay, so just keep those two in mind. We do a little bit of rotation in our knee, not very much because this is a hinge joint, so we don't have that third plane of motion, that second plane of motion. But does anyone know why we do a little bit of rotation? You might have to go back to your lab text to find this. Let's see, knee locking, exactly. Thanks, Emily. So exactly right. So if you ever squat or stand up for a really long time and your knees get locked, you can really feel how locking your knees is a way to give your leg more support and help you when you're standing for extended periods of time. But knee locking allows for a tiny bit of rotation, and there's a muscle that we'll talk about in lab 6 that will allow for this. Okay, great. Quick question. So this is gonna, I'm gonna stop the timer, and I really want you all to think about a muscle that attaches from the anterior femur. So where's the anterior femur? Okay, got it. Where's the tibial tuberosity? We got it. Okay, and then what happens if I shorten that muscle? What's gonna happen? Go ahead. You can even put your fingers on these two spots. Okay, so let's see how we did. Okay, so a majority of us got extension. So would someone who has not spoken today like to volunteer and explain why they thought extension was correct? If you wrote extension as your answer, can you explain? I'll go ahead and show that that is the correct answer. So why is this muscle extending the knee? How can we verify that? Half of us said extension, so anyone who said it. Okay. Anyone who's already spoken and would like to give this a shot, since some of our friends are shy today. Emma, I feel like it's on the tip of your tongue. You're ready.
Okay, I'll go, but it was
Okay.
like 50% a guess because I could not find the anterior femur, but I knew that the tibial tuberosity is this one right here. So like I figured a muscle like pulling it up would like extend it.
Yeah, exactly right. And why can't you find an anterior femur in the lab text? I'll tell you why, because it's not really a thing, right? Anterior femur is just actually saying the front of our femur. So it might have been a slightly bit of a trick question, Emma, but the rest of your logic was completely correct. So any muscle that was attaching from the anterior femur to that tibial tuberosity, if it shortens, it's going to pull the knee forward and extend it. Okay, and this is one of our last few joints is our talocrural joint, right? Fancy word for our ankle. Talo meaning our talus, and crural because leg is usually called crux, right? So that's an anatomy tip. But this is a saddle joint with modified movements. I noted that it's modified movements because a lot of times our joints are doing similar movements, right? Our glenohumeral does the same motions as our hip. We can see similarities in hinge joints, but this saddle has this set of 4 different words that are not the same as anything else we've seen. So I really want you to try this out with me while you're sitting at your desk or your bed or whatever. If we do eversion, we're going to turn our foot outwards so that our big toe is sitting on the ground and our pinky is off the ground. So that's eversion. So right here, this is eversion. Okay, so if we invert that joint, inversion, so they're facing in, if that helps you remember it. So our bottom surface is facing inwards towards the center of our body. That's going to be inversion. Our pinky is on the ground and our big toe is up. Okay. Plantar flexion. Plantar flexion is going to be when our toes are to the ground. A few ways you can remember this. My TA used to tell me that it's because you plant in the ground, and if you like need to dig into the ground, that didn't make any sense to me. But if it makes sense to you, you plant in the ground, so that's why your foot goes to the ground. I like to think of pointing your foot. If you use your foot to point at something, point, plantar. That's how I like to think about it. However you want to think about it. Just keep in mind, they're both called flexion, but they do different things, right? So plantar flexion is going down, toes are down. Dorsiflexion is when you face your toes up to the sky and your heel or your calcaneus is on the ground. Okay? So make sure you understand those movements and think about maybe when you use these movements. Like when do you press on the ground with your toes? When you do plantar flexion? I don't plant with my plantar flexion like my PA used to say, but I do things like driving, right? With plantar flexion. With dorsiflexion, I might put on socks. So think about when you're thinking about these actions, think about what I might do, right? So just like we talked about the scapula, what actions promote these different movements? If you can think about those actions, it'll help you with these questions. Okay, and then we have the last 2 joints of our skeleton, the metatarsophalangeal joints, which are the mirrors, the parallel joints as our metacarpophalangeals. The only difference here is that they're tarso rather than carpo, right? And they adduct, abduct, extend, and flex just the same way. For me, abduction and adduction is kind of difficult to do on my toes, but you can go ahead and try that out, see if you can do it. And keep in mind that the interphalangeal joints in our toes, they also extend and flex. But if you curl your toes over, you might be doing both at the same time. You might be flexing your interphalangeal joints and your metatarsophalangeal. So just feel that out, feel how that motion feels on your feet, so you really understand how this joint is moving. Okay, and here's a quick note: the anatomical axis for the foot is on our second digit. Okay, so that's the end of the material that we have. We're going to do this quick little activity. I don't know why I did that. We're going to do this quick little activity. It's supposed to be a fun activity. I'll break you up into, I think we'll just keep it how it is, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You'll just be group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on this sheet of paper on your case study. And so for example, group 1, you'll pull up Moana for how far I'll go. You'll go to the timestamp that is on your case study sheet. And if you're not exactly on 1.48 seconds, 1 minute and 48 seconds, that's fine. Just pause at whatever is a clear image of your music video. Take a screenshot of that and make sure you have it so that you can explain your actions based on that image. Does that make sense? Yeah, so you're gonna just go to this timestamp, go ahead and take a screenshot of something that's a very clear image, describe what this character is doing, and the case study gave you a few guiders, right? So they said for Moana, describe the right fingers, the left knee, the right knee, and the elbows. But if you have time and if you want to do it later on, you can go ahead and explain a lot more. There's obviously tons of joints that you can talk about. And the point of this activity is to really get you thinking about daily motions that we do and how our body is going to be, how our bones are going to be oriented, right? And it's going to be super helpful when we get into muscles because we're going to be talking a lot about muscles and how they're going to move in relation to all these movements. So let me go ahead and break you out into your groups. Make sure you take a screenshot so we know what you're talking about. You don't have to go ahead and find that image again when we share. And I'll just ask for a few groups to share when we come back. This shouldn't take very long, so let's come back at 7:34. Hey, Audrey? Audrey? You there? Allison, you good? Allison? Allison, are you okay? Hello, Audrey? Audrey, because you're not replying and I don't believe you are in our class, please speak now if you have something to say, if you're in my class or if you're in another TA's class and you're supposed to be here. But if not, I'm going to remove you.
Okay, so this is the picture. And so we said with his right shoulder flexion and then the right elbow is extension because he's like kind of out like this. And his left shoulders and elbow, we just said relaxed, or just in anatomical position because it even looks like he's kind of like got his arm like facing forward. And then the knees are off screen, but from the way that his upper body looks, and obviously like leading up to this, it looks like he's squatting. So we said flexion of the knees as well.
Great, sounds good. I agree with everything you said. Did anyone else have any thoughts? Did that look okay to everyone? Yeah? Thank you so much for sharing, Gretchen. Good job, group 5. One more group. It's your last time if you have not, last chance if you have not talked today. One more chance to practice. Any groups? I've already heard from 5. I have 5 more groups. I don't want to randomly call, so I won't, but if you would volunteer, that would be great. I know there's someone who is ready to share. Is anyone in Cups willing to share or in Frozen willing to share? Is anyone in Moana willing to share?
I can do it.
Thank you, Dominic.
We were Frozen. Wait, how do I share my screen?
I think at the bottom, there's like a green button.
All right, so that's the position. So we said her right elbow is extension, because it's straight out. It's extension specifically of the humeroradial, but also her palm of her hand is facing down. So we said pronation, specifically radial ulnar. As far as the left elbow, we said flexion of the humeroradial and also pronation of the radial ulnar. For right fingers, they're kind of spread out. You can't really see it, but that would be abduction of the metacarpal phalangeal joints. And we assumed left fingers were also abduction. We couldn't really see it, so we just said the same thing. And then her knees are slightly like bent, so flexion of knee joints as well.
Great, thank you so much for that. And now that I can actually see, I think what we were talking about, Dominic, from your breakout room, when you're writing pronation or supination and you're talking about any of the joints in the elbow, you can actually just refer to it as the elbow joint. If we're talking about something specific, like we're talking about the humeral ulnar, we're talking about the humeroradial, you can refer to them specifically, but because they work in pairs for the different actions that they do, you can refer to it as the elbow joint. Great job, though. Thank you for that. Okay, so that is the end of the material for today's class. Seth, who was the director last semester, he created this, or the head TA, sorry, he created this activity. So if you liked this activity, if you thought it was fun, give me a thumbs up. If you were like, whatever, you don't have to react. But I kind of want some feedback on how today's class went. If you felt like asking more questions and being a little more interactive was helpful. Like I said, getting into muscles, we're going to do more of this, hopefully. If you're like, this was the worst thing ever, please shoot me a message or email, and we'll try to do something different. But yeah, so I hope that worked. Annie's going to take over from now on and lead the Kahoot, and I'll jump into breakout rooms if anyone who needs help with anything. I know, Julia, I need to meet with you about your complete anatomy. We're going to talk about that really quickly. And then if anyone else has anything to say, just stay back really quick and we can do it. Office hours are tomorrow. I'm going to actually move them to 3 to 4. Is that what they already are? Not 3 to 4. 2:30 to 3:30, sorry, because I have a meeting from 3:30 to 4:30. So we'll do 2:30 to 3:30 tomorrow for office hours. And I'd like some feedback on that as well. If you're like, you know what, your office hours, like the hours suck, I cannot come at those hours, let me know and I'll try to find some other day in my schedule to have consistent meetings, because I would really like to see some people sometimes and help you all with any questions that you have, especially as we're getting into the next quiz. So remember, that's coming up next week. I think that Annie might have more information on if there's an LA leading a session. Annie, do you know anything?
I think I saw someone in the chat saying that they wanted to lead one this weekend, but I'm not too sure.
Okay, perfect. So they might send out a message like we got last week. So look out for that. I've heard they're really helpful. So thank you all to Annie and the other LAs for doing those. Yeah, if you need anything before Monday, send me a message and I will help you figure out what to do. All right, you're free to go unless you want to stay for Annie's session.
All right.
Annie, I'm going to give you co-host.
Oh, okay.
Oh, not Andy. Sorry, Andy. Annie. Okay, there you go.
Can y'all see the Kahoot? Let's see. Okay, well.
Julia.
Yeah.
Trying to find, I think, did you get kicked out of a breakout room? Was that what?
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't get kicked out, but I like returned to the main one and then like thought I got like, I don't know, that's why I like left the Zoom and then came back. So yeah.
No problem. Okay. Sorry, Annie.
Hello.
Hello. So you can go ahead and share your screen if you want.
Okay. Okay, can you see?
Yes, I can.
So I do I go to isolate? Because that's what I tried to do. And then I'm
trying to label it.
I'm trying to like double click on it. Like I'm double clicking right now on.
Yeah.
And like nothing's like coming up.
Yeah. So go back, click the back button. And then we're trying to do the scapula. So what I would recommend when you're trying to label something, so isolate is a good button if you're like, oh, I have my whole structure and I just want to focus on this for 1 second and then we go back to the main thing. So isolate would not be the greatest button for you to use right now. What I would try to use is hide others. So hide others would be a way for you to get rid of the
Here?
So hide others. So if you use hide or fade, it'll act on the what you've chosen. But if you do hide others, it'll do everything but what you've chosen.
Okay.
So just like what
Well-
happened, now you're just on the scapula, and now you can actually go to tools.
Oh yeah, because I saw like when I would go to isolate, like that
It
tool
disappeared.
would disappear.
So then you can go to tools and go to labels. So that should work for you. Yeah. And the other way to do this, like you started with the main skeleton and then you chose the scapula and then you took out all the other stuff. You could do it that way. The easier way to do it is just look up scapula on the search bar, and then you can find it there.
Oh, and then I can like do text box.
Yeah, you can do text box. You can do so label. So go to labels really quickly. And if you double click anything on the anywhere.
Oh, nice. Okay. Okay, cool. I think I can figure it out from here, and then I'll just
Perfect.
put that on the Dropbox.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yay.
Alrighty.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Zara.
Yeah, no problem.
Questions if you need clarification for anything. Yeah, I don't know if you guys thought it was the metacarpals, because I know when I went through it, I kind of didn't see that. It's the metatarsal bones, yeah. So the feet, yeah. And then if any of y'all played piano or whatnot, the thumb or the big toe is technically finger one, and then it goes out like that. And yeah, so first metatarsal is technically medial to the fifth metatarsal. Okay, let's see. I wrote here the lateral malleolus is on the fibula, not the tibia. Yeah, so that's why it's the green one, if that makes sense. Yeah, so the head of the femur is going to be the thing that directly articulates with that hip socket, and then after the head is the neck, and then all of those other parts happen after the neck. So that's why it's the femoral head that directly articulates with the hip socket. Jumping jacks. Nice. Okay. Okay, so this one was a little confusing just because of the extra wording, but the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton connects at 2 points, and the one that this question is referring to is where the clavicle forms a saddle joint with the sternum, so that's your sternoclavicular joint. The other one is the sacroiliac joint. So if anyone got confused and chose the ilium and the sacrum, the thing is it's not the blue one because it's a fixed joint. It's not going to be a saddle joint, and it's not a ball and socket, and that one connects your ilium and your sternum, so that would be a whole kind of other issue. And then yeah, the other one is like it's not the right joint. The clavicle and the pectoral girdle is not the sternoclavicular joint. All right, so we have 5 fingers. So that's at least, what is it, 1 metacarpal each. So that's why we have 5 metacarpals. And then from 2 through 4, these have 3 phalanges each. And then the thumb only has 2. So, and then, yeah, just adding that up, I think that's how they get those answers. And then carpals, we have 2 rows of 4. Okay. This was in the case study questions earlier in the lab. I think this one is kind of just like a memorizing kind of thing, but yeah, so the trochlea articulates with the ulna, and then the radial head articulates with that capitulum or capitulum, however you say it. Yeah, okay, so it's the anterior superior iliac spine. So it's where you can feel your iliac crest, and then you follow it anteriorly, and there should be a tiny little bump there, and that's where it connects. The other attachment site is the pubic tubercle, which is on the superior ramus. Okay, nice. Okay, yeah, so the acetabulum, whatever, however you say that, that's the hip joint, because like I think the last question or last 2 questions, that's where it mentioned it. That's the name of the hip joint. So yeah, that's what directly articulates to that head of the femur, and that is a ball and socket joint. The egg and socket joint is only the wrist, for future reference. Right, most of y'all got that one. So the humeral radial joint is a limited ball and socket joint. The glenohumeral joint is a ball and socket joint, and the radiocarpal joint is an egg and socket joint. Nice. Okay, so, oh wait, actually, hold on. So the biggest or the largest nerve in the body is the sciatic nerve. So if you can associate the names, the corresponding skeletal structure that it travels through is the greater sciatic notch. And the lesser sciatic notch just doesn't exist, I'm pretty sure. So that's how you can remember it's the greater one. It was like a tiny detail in the lab manual, so you probably just have to like go back and read through it.
If you take some time and do the activity that I posted, the different naming things for the pelvis, you'll get.
Oh yeah, that. Yeah, it's really good if you have all the joints written out and then you kind of can see it visually. compared to like flipping through the lab manual. I know it's kind of hard to remember everything just like reading through it. Okay, this one. I wrote similar to arms. So flexing is a kind of forward motion, and then extending is backwards. So when you're moving your leg back to kick that soccer ball, it's extension. And then when you kick it forward, that's flexion. Okay. So for this one, me and Zara talked about it a little bit. So in the lab manual, it says that the scaphoid lunate and one of the other ones. So 3 of the bones are mainly associated with this particular joint. Although the lab manual doesn't kind of like directly state it, visually we see that it's the scaphoid bone. But if you do say lunate, I can probably understand that, and I think that's something we would just have to leave up to like further review.
The main thing in that question I think you should get is the proximal versus the distal carpals.
Mm. We talked a lot about this joint, particularly in class. Nice. Okay, so what joint is the most distal? So if you kind of just look at them all in order, the most proximal one is the glenohumeral joint. That's right up here. And then right after that is the humeral ulnar joint. And then we have the radial oh, you can't even see me. Okay. And then there's the radial ulnar, and then we have the proximal interphalangeal joints. So even though maybe it was like a trick question, it says the proximal interphalangeal joint. Like, yes, proximal is in the name, but out of all of the ones listed, it is the most distal. Okay, so the hip joint is a ball and socket joint. So you can memorize it in that sense of like knowing what kind of joint it is. And we know that the ball and socket is one of the only joints that can do 3 planes, a 3-plane movement. Or, you know, Zara also mentioned that, you know, using our bodies as a study tool is, you know, really helpful. So you can think about all the motions that maybe your hip joint can move, and then that'll help you come up with the answer for that. So like, you know, the kicking the soccer ball, that's one that, you know, they use a lot. I couldn't really come up with other ones. I was thinking maybe doing the split was like adduction, abduction. And then, I don't know if y'all use TikTok a lot, but there's like that one dance move where they kind of point the toes in and then they do the finger thing. But yeah, that would be like rotation. Okay, so let's see, a tubercle is a bump of elevation, and then tuberosity is a slightly larger, broader version of it. So they're both like these kind of bumps or notches that come off of the bone, and yeah, it is just like an attachment place for a lot of muscles. Do I have any? Oh, like one I found on there, like the deltoid tuberosity, that is like a place where the deltoid attaches. Some of them are named like easy like that. Other ones you kind of have to just memorize. It's a strange. It can be strange, but it also has a purpose. Okay, this question, when I looked at it, I think they meant like, because like in the lab manual, it said that the surgical neck exists or like, you know, has that name because it is more commonly broken compared to the anatomical neck. I think that's what they were referring to. I don't know if it's like in general the most common place to fracture, because I mean, I fractured my humerus and it was like towards the bottom, so I don't know. But I think, yeah, in general, like the fact that you want to remember there is that the surgical neck exists because it is more commonly broken than the anatomical neck. Oh, wow. Yay, yay, Emma. Nice, good job, Otto. Who's number one? Yay, good job, Andy. Okay, well, that's all we have for Kahoot, and I'm pretty sure someone is going to release the Kahoot link, or I could just copy it here if anyone wants it. Oh, nope, okay, this is not my computer. I don't know how to use it. Someone else will post the link at some point. But thank you for playing. I'm glad y'all came to review.
Thank you, Annie.
Yay, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Annie.
Glad to help.
Bye, Zara. Bye, Annie.
Bye. Good luck on the quiz.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Let's see. How do I undo that? Okay. And then I just
I was just thinking
technology.
I was just thinking while I was answering a question, I was thinking about how Dr. Johnson encouraged that we ask the LAs if they want to lead a session. And so we have we're down to like the last four, right? 5, 6, 7, 8. So if there's any section that you're like interested in teaching and you'd like to just take over for the week, then I'm happy to, you know, assist you and be your assistant to the class and answer the chat questions. And I'll kind of just leave it to you, or we can collaborate on the slides. So basically, I'll just give you some information about it, and then you can just like let me know whenever.
Okay.
So basically, what I do when I prepare the class is the slides are crap. There's nothing.